visitors this morning? We are, of course, continuing on in our narrative lectionary journey today. So we are jumping about 400 years from, you have to jump that much if you're going to get through all of it in 9 months, right? I said that in Quinto and everyone's like, really? Like there's nothing happened in that 400 years we should look at? No, lots of stuff happened in that 400 years we should look at, and we will another year. But this year we are jumping from Joseph all the way to Moses, and not the beginning of Moses. We're like hard and, well, Moses lived a really long time, so it's probably not quite the middle of Moses, but getting pretty far into Moses' life. So last week, just to kind of give you a summary of those 400 years, last week we were with Joseph, and Joseph was in Potiphar's house. He was accused of sexual assault. He was put in prison, and we heard that he became kind of the head prisoner. Everybody was under his control. Well, later on, Joseph begins to interpret dreams, and some of the dreams he interprets are for Pharaoh himself. And these dreams warn of an impending famine that will happen for 7 years. And so Joseph interprets these dreams and then becomes in charge of storing up food so that when the famine hits, the people of Egypt will be okay. So Joseph becomes number 2. It's Pharaoh, and then it's Joseph. And Joseph is an Israelite, but he's dedicated to helping the Egyptians. Joseph's brothers come needing food in the midst of this famine, and they end up settling in the land of Egypt. So the 12 sons of Jacob, the tribes of Israel, they settle amongst the Egyptians. And for a long time, this is a really great situation. This has worked out well for the Egyptians and the Israelites. They trust each other, they work well together. But some years down the road, there comes a Pharaoh who knows nothing of Joseph, who knows nothing of what the Israelite people have done for the Egyptian people. And this Pharaoh fears the Israelites. He fears their number and their power. So he begins to do what is in his power to squash the Israelites. First, by enslaving them. Well, he realized that's kind of backfiring because the Israelites are still growing in number. And so then he decides to kill the sons of the Israelites. So you might remember that this is when Moses comes into play, right? Moses' mother is an Israelite woman. She gives birth to a son. She is to throw him into the river to drown, and she refuses to let that happen. And so for a while she hides Moses, but it becomes difficult to hide a child. And so she puts him in a basket and sails the basket down the river. The basket is found by Pharaoh's daughter, and Pharaoh's daughter raises Moses as her own child in the house of Pharaoh. Moses, the Israelite, raised as an Egyptian, later in life sees an Egyptian beating an Israelite slave. Moses loses his temper in seeing this injustice and kills the Egyptian. Moses then must flee from Egypt. He leaves and he establishes his own life. He marries, he has a great father-in-law, he has sheep, he does all these things, he has his own life. And in the midst of this life in exile, God comes and says, I need you to go back. I need you to go back to Egypt, and I need you to free my people from slavery. And Moses says, why me? I don't think so. All of the usual things that people say to God. And then follows it by saying, who do I say is sending me? And we have the great God says, I am. And so Moses goes into Egypt and convinces the Israelites to leave slavery. And it was much easier to convince the Israelites than it was to convince Pharaoh to release them. So you have what we know as the plagues, right? The locusts, the blood running in the water, the cattle dying, and the last plague, the most painful, difficult plague of all, the killing of the firstborn sons of the Egyptians. So following the killing of the firstborn sons of the Egyptians, Pharaoh finally says, fine, go. We're done with you. And he sends the Israelites away to freedom. This is where we're picking up the story this morning, in Exodus chapter 14. Pharaoh has sent the slaves away and is now going to experience a little bit of buyer's remorse. So we're picking up in Exodus 14. We're going to read some selected verses in chapter 14, starting in verse 5 this morning. When the king of Egypt was told the people had fled, the minds of Pharaoh and his officials were changed toward the people, and they said, "What have we done letting Israel leave our service?" So he had his chariot made ready, and he took his army with him. He took 600 packed chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. Now we're going to jump ahead to verse 10. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites looked back, and there were the Egyptians advancing on them. In great fear, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt? Let us alone and let us serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to keep still." And I jump to verse 21 now. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. At the morning watch, the Lord, in the pillar of fire and cloud, looked down upon the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so that they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at dawn the sea returned to its normal depth. As the Egyptians fled before it, the Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. This story is pretty well known, the parting of the Red Sea. We even have little comics about it, that circulate from time to time. My favorite comic about Moses is Moses fishing, and he has a buddy fishing next to him, and he keeps parting the water under his buddy so his buddy can't catch any fish. That's my favorite, because it just is a story that is well known. And I like the fact that we can add some comedy to it, because when you read the story here, it's not so much a comedy. It is much more of a tragedy. You have the Israelite people who are finally getting their freedom. And here they are in the wilderness, and behind them is a giant sea, and running toward them is a great army of Pharaoh. They are stuck. They have nowhere to go. it looks as if their choices are die at the hands of Pharaoh's army or drown in the sea behind us. That seems to be their only options. And so it's understandable that they have this great fear, that they're like, Moses, why would you do this to us? You just brought us out here to die? The graves in Egypt weren't good enough for you? Like, seriously? So, we criticize them, but their fear is so valid here. And then we see this great opening in the water, and God creates a way for them when there is no way, and they're able to escape from Pharaoh and his army, and we think, yes, like, this is it, this is great. And we have this really good feeling about this story. We love a happy ending. And then all of a sudden, we read the line, God threw Pharaoh's army into the sea. God, in a fiery pillar, puts panic in the hearts of Pharaoh's army and brings the waters crashing down. And as they're trying to escape this water, God throws Pharaoh's army into the sea. No longer is it quite the happy ending that we all hoped for and that we would like. Could we just end with the Israelites escaping? Do we really need to continue on anymore? Let's just stop the story there, right? But we have to do, maybe we don't have to do something with it, but we have to acknowledge that this happened, that this sea was collapsed, that all of Pharaoh's army drowned. And for me, I don't think there is a way to make it comfortable. I don't think there is a way to be like, well, it's God's only choice, so God did it, and God is a stronger God than I could ever be. So all of that is true, of course. But for me, I think there's more to it than that. That there is something larger that we can take away from this story. So, this story of bringing the Israelites out of slavery, of saving them through the Red Sea, is often mentioned elsewhere in the Bible. And one of the places that it is heavily mentioned is in reminding people to keep the Sabbath. I am the God, the Lord your God, who brought you out of slavery, therefore keep the Sabbath holy. We hear that a lot, over and over again. And this week, it was pointed out to me that perhaps there's a larger message behind that. More than just, I am God, I did this for you, so you need to listen to me and keep the Sabbath holy. Maybe there is something else we can learn about the Sabbath from this story in particular. This story of Pharaoh, of his army, of the Red Sea. Pharaoh, as a king, is supposed to care for his people. That is one of his jobs as king. He is supposed to be the Lord of his people, who thinks about their best interests, who keeps them safe, who keeps them fed, who makes sure that society is running in an orderly manner where everybody can live in prosperity. That's what a good king, a good leader, is supposed to do. And so it makes sense that after God has destroyed Egypt in the plagues, with their harvest, with their animals, and then with their firstborn sons, that Pharaoh would send the Israelites away. That makes sense, because Pharaoh is supposed to protect his people, and the Israelites are bringing pain and suffering and death to the Egyptians by enslaving them. And so Pharaoh sending them away makes sense. But then Pharaoh says, wait, what am I doing? Why would I send the Israelites away when they could serve us? They serve us so well. Pharaoh gets cold feet because he realizes that he no longer is going to have the economic benefits of slaves. Pharaoh is not thinking about his people and their safety in a decision to go bring the Israelites back. Rather, Pharaoh is thinking about the finances of bringing the people back. If he enslaves the Israelites, that's good for his bank account. He doesn't have to pay people to do work. He gets all of this free labor, and that makes his bank account more profitable. He's thinking about how great it is on his economy to have the Israelites enslaved. And so he goes to bring them back. He isn't thinking about the people, the Israelites or the Egyptians. He isn't thinking about what is best for the Israelites or for his own Egyptians. He's thinking about the money here, the financial impact of this. Pharaoh values money and profit over people. We can see that in his choice to bring the Israelites back. All the firstborn sons of Egypt have just been killed. But Pharaoh is more worried about the money. His community, his entire country is grieving. They have lost their sons. And yet Pharaoh is concerned about the financial ramifications. Perhaps when we're reminded about this story in relation to the Sabbath, perhaps it's a reminder that people matter more than profit. In Deuteronomy 5, when this story is used as a reason for Sabbath, it goes on to say, you will rest, your slaves will rest, your animals will rest, your land will rest. All of the ways that the Israelites make money through producing crops, through their animals, through their slaves, none of that is to take place on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is meant to be a day of rest for all creation. Very much the opposite of what Pharaoh sees. Pharaoh sees every day as a day to make profit off the pain and suffering of other people. And God here is saying, no, that's not how it works. Yes, that's how it works with Pharaoh, but that is not how it will work as the people of God. The people of God will rest, and they will value people over making money at least one day a week. We have this understanding here in keeping the Sabbath holy that we are to break from the pursuit of economic gain and instead look at the people around us, recognizing that we all need rest because we all have value beyond financial gain. I read a book, the last book by Rachel Held Evans. She was about 2/3 through writing it when she died. And in there she had a chapter on Sabbath. And she began to talk about what Sabbath looked like for her and her family, and even growing up, what it looked like. Her parents were very devout Christians, and they believed that they should rest on Sunday. And so instead of cooking a meal, they picked up food or went out to a restaurant so that her mom wouldn't have to cook. And instead of mowing his lawn on Sunday, her dad paid somebody else to mow his lawn. And she points out that in order for her family to rest, it meant somebody else wasn't resting. It meant somebody else had to be working. And she said, that is not true rest. That is not true Sabbath. If my rest means somebody else cannot rest, then I'm not doing it right. And that is what this story is highlighting. That's what we're told in Deuteronomy 5 as well. Not only will you rest, but your slave will rest too. It doesn't mean you just make them do the work. Your animal will rest. Your land will rest. Because people are more important than profits. I find it how hard of a lesson the Egyptians had to learn. The Egyptians had to learn this lesson, that people matter more than profit and money, by an entire army drowning in a Red Sea. Can we learn this lesson without all of the death? Can we learn this lesson the easy way, by reading this story? And not just in our own individual lives, on our own individual levels, but on our larger societal levels as well. Can we learn that a cheap shirt is not worth it if the person who made it can't afford to feed their family? Can we learn that no chocolate is so good that kids should be picking the cocoa beans in dangerous situations? Should we learn that what we have should not come at the expense of the people who grew it or who made it? Can we learn that people matter more than profit in every aspect of our lives? Not just in our individual lives, but in the world. And can we be brave enough to stand for that? Brian and I were talking this week about something, and he said, I don't know, I just think there might be repercussions for me. And I said, yeah, there could be. But to be in true solidarity, don't we have to be willing to face those repercussions too? And we just kind of left it at that. We didn't talk about it anymore. But this morning, when I was reading this text, there was a line that has never hit me the way it hit me this morning. The Lord will fight for you. That's what Moses tells the people here. The Lord will fight for you. Stand firm. The Lord will fight for you. All you have to do is stand still. Are we willing to stand firm on our belief that people matter more than profit, and trust that the Lord will fight with us for this? The Lord will fight for you. Just as he did when he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to this earth to save us. Today we celebrate the sacrament of Holy Communion, a reminder of God's grace and God's love. And as we do so, I remind you that it is Christ's holy table, where all God's children are welcome to come and to be fed.